welcome to Asia Brownback session. Today we have with us Ms. Gargi Tyagi, lecturer at OP Jindal University. She holds an LLM degree from the University of Edinburgh with a specialization in criminal law. Her expertise encompasses research and analysis of comparative criminal and international law across various countries. She has also delved into domains like intellectual property and plea bargaining. Welcome, Gargi.
Thank you.
Notably, one of your research papers bears an intriguing title, which is very difficult, at least for me. How social harm perspective can complement or challenge or move beyond criminology. Frankly, I would love to know more about this, but not this time. Today, we'll stick with our topic, which is changing of companies' criminal liabilities, which is also similar to the topic of your dissertation, which is corporate criminal responsibilities and sexual offending. Before jumping to today's discussion, I would like to know what was your journey like from constitutional honors to criminal law to specialization in criminal law. What made you interested in the subject? Why this subject?
First of all, thank you so much for the lovely introduction which you gave me. Secondly, if I will talk about my journey, uh, firstly it started with my dad being also a lawyer and also from a law background. So I was interested in it. Firstly, I was just going with the law school like every law student does. But then when I was studying, I realized that I really like criminal law. And for understanding criminal law, you should have a base of constitution, because when you understand the base or any the law of the land, then only you will be able to understand what the other laws are, and if they are contrary to it, if they are in harmonious relation to the constitution. So I knew that I had to make my foundation strong first, and then I can go for something which I am interested in. So criminal law was one of that field which really excited me, and I always grew up watching these criminal series and all those things. So these are the things which really inspire you. So that is my journey of specialization.
I guess we can begin our discussion for the day and look at the changing criminal liabilities of companies. But before I hand over, but before I hand over the stage to you, I would like to give a brief picture to our audience of how companies have evolved. I'll keep it very quick and a very general way and not get into the legalities of it. And then you can give your insights on whatever I say, and you can just point out if I'm wrong anywhere. The evolution of companies into the entities as we know them today has been a journey spanning centuries. Starting from early trade and barter system, human societies gradually organized into skilled craftsmen during the medieval period. The concept of joint stock companies emerged in the 17th century. The famous and maybe the first one, notably, is the East India Company, which we can also say the original corporate raiders who went on to become the de facto rulers of most of the Indian subcontinent. Then came the Industrial Revolution, which brought mechanized production and larger vertical integrated companies that laid down the groundwork for modern corporation with centralized management and limited shareholder liabilities. Then came the management principles and bureaucratic structure that gained traction mostly across industries post World War II. Uh, the 20th century, the information age followed, introduced digital technologies, globalization, and supply chain reshaped. The 21st century, in which we all are witnessing, is the age of disruption from giants like Google, Apple, Amazon, or Facebook. With disruptions came new challenges, and some of these challenges we'll be addressing today. So, you want to add something, or should we just get over?
No, I will deal about the historical aspect as well.
So, can you very quickly help our audience understand what we mean by companies' criminal liability? What are the crimes that come under this? And because most of our audience belongs to a non-legal background, I would request you that if you are going to use any technical legal term. Please explain that.
Okay, so I will be speaking in a very simple language so that everybody can understand. So, first of all, what is criminal liability of any corporation? First of all, we have to understand what corporation is. As per the Companies Act, a corporation can be a one party corporation or a company, or it can be multiple people as well. So, whenever you're forming a company or a corporation, it is to do some business, right? So, whenever you're doing something, there can be accountability of it if your actions are not as per the IPC supposedly, or if there are any other sections or laws which are there in the in the state. So if your actions are contrary to the laws which are present, then you will be accountable for the actions which you're doing. So it is, the topic is basically focusing on the criminal liability of a company, because when we talk about company, what comes in our mind is that as we know that for criminal liabilities imprisonment is given or fines are given, but when we talk about corporates and criminal liability, it can create what we can say ambiguous statement in our heads, that how can a corporate can be liable criminally, how can a corporate can be imprisoned or can be dealt on the same manner as a person who is committing any crime which is there in the IPC, because IPC is dealing with the crime. So any action which is uh, if we want to describe what crime is, so crime is anything which is there in the IPC. So any action which is prohibited by IPC can be considered to be a crime. Right. So, criminal liability of a corporation is basically when we will see what are the crimes where the corporations can be held to be criminally liable, and how they will be criminally liable. This is what we will see in this today's session as well. Uh, if I want to add to this, the types of crimes which can be included by the corporations can be some kind of fraud to the customers, or it can include the antitrust laws. So, if a company is having some, or you can say the market competition. So, whenever there is a company and the company is coming into the market, so they cannot, uh, what we can say is, they cannot form a pact with other companies that this will be the fixed market price. That is something which is criminally liable. Or if there are ads which we see on the internet and on the TVs all the time, if they are misleading, or if they are selling any product which is not as per the guidelines, therefore it is harmful to the people. Therefore these are some of the crimes which we can say where the corporations are heavily involved, and it is not the fault of one person. Therefore the companies can also be criminally liable. So this is the whole, we can say that this is the whole summary of what how and what the company can be held liable criminally other than civil liability.
So basically, what you said, in short, if I'll put it, is that when an individual commits a crime, they are held liable because it is believed that they are physically and intellectually capable of the act that they have done. But that the same does not apply to a company, because it is said that they have no soul to damn, or no, they don't have a body to kick. So my next question would be, is it still the case, or the scenarios have changed over time? Can you give us some historical developments or some cases that led to the recognition of corporate criminal responsibilities?
Right. What you're asking is a very good question, because it is a valid question, because if a company is not having its mind of its own, then how can a person or a company be held criminally liable? Because in criminal liability, intention is very important. So if your intention is wrong, because mens rea and actus reus. So if there is no malice intention, how can a corporate be held to be criminally liable? And for a person, you can tell that the intention is malice or the intention is wrong, but for a corporate who is not having the mind of its own, how can a corporate be held to be criminally liable. So when, if we talk about the development which happened in the liabilities of company, we can start with the very ancient times. First of all, when the companies came into picture, like Shivani also talked about the whole development of the industrialization, or and also the globalization. So it started with the corporations, and the individuals who were in the corporations and they were committing some crimes. That was when the liability started of just the individuals in the corporation. When we move further, there was, like Shivani was talking about, the industrial revolution. During the industrial revolution, it was struck that the companies are committing civil wrongs. So the criminal liabilities was not into picture even during the industrial revolution as well. That time there were some laws which were made regarding the civil liabilities, where the fines could be levied upon the companies if they are doing some um, wrong. Therefore, or if they're having some problems regarding the properties, because these are all civil wrongs, or there is any breach of contract, these are all civil wrongs. But when we move forward, for we can say in the 20th century, or in the 21st century, then we realize that the corporations or the high management of the corporations, they are all together and then they are committing an organized crime. For example, there can be tax evasion, there can be fraud, there can be misleading, misrepresentation. So this is done not just by one person. That is the whole scenario of the whole company or the whole organization. So that is how it evolved over time. First of all, the civil liability was set up, and then there was a need of criminal liability. And then in the 21st century, we can say that we actually saw in some countries that they're having specialized laws for uh, implementing it on the corporations. So if we talk about UK, they are having a specific corporate homicide and corporate manslaughter act, which is there for the companies. And as the name itself suggests, it is, you can say that it is putting the liability of manslaughter as well as homicide on the corporations, even though the company does not have its hands, and they cannot kill any person. But if they are having such kind of environment, if they are creating such kind of actions within the corporation, then they will be held for such repercussions of it. Or if they are, or the employees are directed to do some sort of a work which is risking the life of the other person, then also, because it is happening in the course of employment, that person is not intending to commit the crime, but then it is the repercussion of what the act was wanted by the corporation, then also the corporation needs to be held liable for that, right? Also, when we talk about how can a corporation be held liable for anybody's else's acts, so mainly two uh, there are mainly two ways which, in which a liability can be transferred to the corporation. It is vicarious liability as well as, you can say, strict liability. So that depends on the jurisdiction of different countries, because they are having different laws. There are some countries where they are not having any specific laws for corporations, but then since corporate is also treated as a legal person, therefore the corporate is also included in the laws which are made just for the individuals. So they were included by the, we can say, by the case precedents, or by the judgments, or by the interpretation, or by the academic writings. So these were the interpretations where the corporates also came into the ambit of the criminal law, where there are no specific laws for say, let's just say, for saying that the corporate should be criminally liable.
So is it still the case? There are no specific provisions that now the case has changed, or is it still that depends on the interpretation of the cases and? what was held
Right.
earlier.
So what you're saying is right, that there are some countries where there are no specific provisions. However, it is accepted, and most of the countries are aware of the criminal liabilities of the corporations now, and they are including the corporations into their laws. They are enacting new laws. They are enacting even if they are not enacting the new laws, then they are bringing amendments, or there are case precedents. And in if we talk about Germany, or even if we talk about India, then there is PMLA, which is Prevention of Money Laundering Act. There also the corporations are held to be criminally liable. So it is not particularly saying that only a corporation, but a person can be held liable. So that is what is applied to the corporations as well, and as well as to the people.
The historical part which you mentioned, if I'm not wrong, British laws were the first one to recognize criminal liability of corporates in the mid 19th century. But then again, homicide and manslaughter were not part of it.
Right, right. Manslaughter and homicide came very late. It is in 2006, if I'm not wrong. But yes, it came very late. But before that, there was the liability of the corporation, criminal liability as per the vicarious liability, or you can say by the identification. If we will talk about the identification, then it is talking about that you identify if that work constitute to be a crime or not. So that is the main principle which their liability was based on.
Because the next point that I'm going to ask you would be on the principles. And of course, according to the principles, what does India follow? So, by what I have understood is the countries they have different laws and they have various approaches to the forms and the scope of these liabilities, and there are different principles that these laws are based on. Like the US has the vicarious liability or the respondent superior, which you have mentioned earlier. For our audience, I would like to explain it in a sentence that vicarious liability is an offense. It's said to be an offense is said to be a vicarious liability when it is committed by an employee or agent within the scope of his duties and that somehow benefits the corporation. Then in the British law, they do not follow the vicarious liability as such. Their model is called the identification model, where it is believed that corporation's state of mind mirrors that of their senior officers and the employees. Europe then has a different model. So, what model does India follows? And are these models effective enough dealing with the issues, or do we need an alternative principle that would not only look at the acts of the individual or the corporation in totality, but also companies' culture, policies, practices, management, or other characteristics that has encouraged the act or omission of the offense?
Right. So I would just like to explain it a bit further, the vicarious liability, because in some jurisdictions or in some countries there is strict liability also. So the vicarious liability, as Shivani said, that it is based on the relationship. So when there is a relationship of master or servant, or if there is any relationship of employer and employee, then the employer or the master, we can say, that is having the authority on the other person. So in vicarious liability, what happens, that you are working for the other person or for your master, for the employer. That is why in that course of action or in that course of employment, if you're doing something or you are doing something which is beneficial to the corporation, then the corporation should be held liable, and that is known as the vicarious liability principle, that the corporation will be held liable for the acts of the employee because he is or she is whatever, that person is not having the authority, or that person is given the orders to do so, and therefore those acts are known as the acts of the company. Like you said that we will like you said that the we don't have to look at just the individuals acts, and also will the companies will be liable. So that is something of the principle which is making the companies liable on the acts of the employees. When we talk about strict liability, what happens that even though you are taking any reasonable reasonable precautions and there is no negligence on your part, and still the party or the still the corporation will be held liable. So when you're dealing with, supposedly you're dealing with very serious matters, supposedly if you're dealing with medicines, then there can be no scope of any mistake. Then in those cases there can be strict liability. By strict liability, the corporations, even though they have taken all the reasonable uh, precautions and they are following all the rules by the norms, then also they will be liable because it is affecting a lot of people and it will harm a lot of people. The other thing which you asked me about, what India is following. So in India there is also vicarious liability, and even when any company is committing any fraud, for example, if company is involved in money laundering, then they are held to be liable as per the intent of the corporation or what is the culture of that organization. So if, let's just say that there is one organization and there has been a system set up for money laundering and all the management is involved in it, then whole company will be held to be liable, criminally liable, even though there can be a saying that the last step is taken by one person or the orders are given by one person, but that is the intent of the company, that is what the company wants to do, that is the vision of the company, then the company will be held liable for so. uh, and also there are certain problems, I think you were asking me about that there are, if we are able to reach that
These
level,
models are
yes,
effective.
the models are effective or not. What we can say as for now is that the awareness is there, but specific acts are not there. For example, criminal liability is there. A corporate is held to be criminally liable, but when they are approaching the court, the judges have no idea or they have no guidelines as per if when we are talking about any heinous or very serious crimes, then there is life imprisonment given to a person. But when it is in the case of corporate, then even the judges don't know what fine should be given to the company, which is equivalent to the imprisonment of lifetime. And also, when we talk about the fine, then also it is under question that is it of the same severity as the imprisonment, because in imprisonment, the life imprisonment, the life of the person is wasted or that person is spending his life in the jail, whereas when we are fining or putting any penalties on a big organization supposedly, then we can say that it is not causing that much dent to them as per when we compare it to the person who is getting the life imprisonment. So these are the things where there is no specific guidelines. So that is what I believe, that there should be specific guidelines, what should be constituted and what should be appropriate and proportional to the life imprisonment if we talk about serious or heinous crimes if committed by the corporation.
Yeah, because uh, if you look at the Bhopal gas tragedy of the 1984, which remains one of the worst industrial disasters of our time, the company, the Union Carbide company, was held liable, and the case went on for around more than 3 decades. Yes. And the people who were found guilty were just sent for the imprisonment of 2 years and were out on bail. The fine imposed was also nothing; it was a mere amount of 1 lakh rupees. And the same with the Upar cinema, the fire case, if we look at, and then the very recent case of the Vizag, the Vishakhapatnam LG polymer gas leak. So, do you think that um, the these cases or the incidents as such, because even after Bhopal gas tragedy, multiple gas leaks have happened, or similar cases have happened, and there is no end to it.
Right. So, when we talk about the Bhopal gas tragedy case, it created a lot of chaos and it created a lot of awareness. But when we talk about in terms of laws, then there were no concrete laws which were made after that. However, if we talk about the oil leakage of the BP, that in that case the company was held liable criminally, and they were fined with a huge amount. It was in billions.
4.5 billion.
4.5 billions, right? And that was considered to be the highest penalty which was given to any company. However, this was the talk of the town, and after this there were certain aspects which came into picture, or we can say that there were more awareness after that regarding the environment and also regarding the pollution as well, also the public safety. So if the corporation is held to be criminally liable, we can say that 4.5 billion was not creating that much of a dent which proportionate to the damage which it has caused, but it has created and it has impacted a lot of countries to come up with different and another set of rules regarding the environment, regarding the pollution, regarding the liabilities of the corporates as well, and also the liabilities of the higher management, that they should be liable individually as well, and the company should be liable individually as well. So if there is a corporate which is a big corporate, then after this case there was a lot of commotion, and this was included that even the damage to the environment, even the damage to the pollution, causing the pollution, damage to the public safety, these will be covered under these aspects of corporate criminal liability. And also that it should be made multinational, that these companies are having their we can say businesses in different countries, and therefore the other countries should also help in criminalizing these organizations. So what happens, the sometimes what the corporations, they get away with the crimes which they have committed just because the other countries are not helping in the process. So that is something which needs to be there uniformly in all the countries, so that there is a limitation put on the companies or the corporates which are big enough and they are having their businesses which are widespread. And this case actually helped a lot in understanding the whole concept of criminal liability as well, and how oh, even such a big amount is not causing a really big dent in the reputation as well as in the business of that corporation.
But do you think that instead, matlab, okay, the financial penalties are fine, the big amounts or the small amounts are fine. But do you think that if they would be held criminally liable, there would be some amount of imprisonment that is given to the management or people who are actually responsible for it, would change the scenario? Because everywhere that we listen are the financial penalties that are imposed.
Right. What you're saying is absolutely correct, that a corporation cannot be held or cannot be given the punishment of imprisonment. However, there can be different aspects to it other than fines. There can be seizure of their properties, seizure of their assets. So if any corporate is committing such a severe crime, then there can be a seizure of 70% or 80% of their properties or assets. That can cause a very big dent. Also, there can be temporary shutdowns for a specific period of time. There can be permanent shutdowns for corporations, like we see that there is life imprisonment. But then if the corporates are ready to mend their ways and they are saying that we want to comply with the orders, so the orders can be given, or a chance can be given to the corporates as well, that you have to mend your ways, you have to apply these things in your business, and then you can work. And if they don't comply, and then the punishment can be applicable on that person or the corporation. So there are other things other than fine. We can't put imprisonment in the list of the punishments for the corporation, because a corporation cannot be put into jail. However, the individuals who are high management, they should, because this is the intent of the whole organization or the corporate, and if the whole corporate is intending to do so, then the higher management which is involved in the decision making, and as we were talking about the identification, that the higher management is actually working on the vision of the corporate, then those people are to be criminally held liable and also can be imprisoned. And when we talk about the corporations, then corporations can get the beating by shutdowns and by the seizures, by the fines, the penalties, and also there can be some orders which are saying that you should mend your ways or modify the types of actions they are taking or the procedures they are following.
Do you think that the procedures are taking way too long because to come up or things? Because like you mentioned, regarding the health, the medicine thing. During the 80s and the 90s, there were many cases for the cough syrup, the poisonous, that killed many kids, not just in one region, but in the Jammu Kashmir, in the Haryana, in the Himachal, and there were series of cases over the decade, and those cases have not ended. There were recent cases that some cough syrup was supplied from a pharmaceutical company from Noida, and that has killed kids in Africa, somewhere in Africa. I don't exactly remember the name. So we don't see scenarios actually changing.
What you're saying is, I will not say that is 100% correct, because when we talk about the past, there was no criminal liability, but now there is. So we cannot say that things are not changing at all, because things are changing as per the liabilities as well.
Do you
And
think
as
they are
per,
changing at a very slow pace?
yes, what I believe is that since there are no specific guidelines, and what you're saying, this part is absolutely correct. As I was talking about the corporate homicide and the corporate manslaughter act of the UK, there were also hardly any 50 convictions in 10 years. So the rate of conviction is very less. The laws are there, but the implementation part, or we can say the specific punishments which should be given, is not there. So everybody, even the corporates, know that these are the things which is not considered to be good, or these are the things which are considered to be crimes, but then they are not knowing what the repercussions of those acts are, because that is not specified, and it is then again put in the hands of the judges, if we can say. Then they are also not sure what should be done in this particular case, because there are no specific guidelines as to how to deal with these cases. We know that committing a murder is a crime, but if we didn't know what punishment should be given to the person, then there would be so much discrepancy and also differences in different countries regarding the punishment of murder as well, right? So this is the same scenario which we are facing regarding the criminal liabilities of corporations at this point in time, that we understand the corporates are involved in such activities which are criminal in nature, but then we don't know what the punishments should be. So this is the state we are in right now. This is what we can conclude on that.
Okay. So far, the conversation that we had was more about the white collar setup, the desk and the computer setup that we mostly all of us work in. However, there is a different setup that is known as the blue collar setup, the factories or the construction, the mining setups. So, and then there is no particular set of vertical that we deal with when it comes to the um, blue collar setup. It can be a warehouse, it can be well, a factory, an outdoor area, and people there are the migrant workers. They work for hundreds of hours, Monday to Sunday. So, the same set of things which are applied in the white collar setup, do they actually apply in the blue collar setup as such? Because the whole mental harassment or the things that we generally talk about, and then there is the awareness of things that are there in the white collar, the whole top to bottom management thing kind of changes in the blue collar. So, how do you understand the concerns while dealing with a blue collar setup?
See, if we talk about white collar crimes and blue collar crimes, it is particularly easier to find the offender in a blue collar crime, because when we are talking about white collar crimes and also of an organization or a corporation which is very huge, supposedly there is a company who is having 4 subsidiaries, then what can be done, that if any criminal activity is done by one subsidy, even though the CEO who is at the parent company can say that I am not involved. Therefore, the liability gets shifted and there is no person to blame on. And then the organization can also get away that this is not what we intended to do, and that is that particular manager who is giving the orders. So when there is different level, or there are many tiers of hierarchy, then it is even more difficult to establish the liability. And even for the corporation, if the parent company will be liable, if the only the subsidiary will be liable, so these are the things which come into picture. When we talk about the blue collar crimes, what happens in such crimes, the workmen, or when we talk about the laborers, the maximum, or we can say the problem which we see there is about awareness, that they don't know about their rights, or they are not able to avail their rights because the authority which is above them uh, is not permitting them to do so, or they are being coerced, they are not being heard. So here, in if there is not an organization, or we can say any systematic organization, then we can look for the direct involvement. For example, if there is no setup, or there is no hierarchy, or there is no tier system, then if I am getting a bad work environment, and if I am the worker, then I can say that you being my supervisors, this is the person who is torturing me, and then you can be held liable. There can be individual liability in those cases where there are no systematic setup. But when we talk about the corporates which are big enough, then the liability gets lost in the level of management. So when we talk about smaller corporations, it is easy to establish that these 4 set of people or 5 set of people is the management, and they are making the orders. And therefore the employees, they will not be held accountable for all the actions or the intent of the corporation. However, if we talk about the big corporations, every manager is also having a boss above that person's head. So nobody is there to take the responsibility of that particular act or any liability. So therefore, it is even more difficult regarding the identification of the liability when the corporation is big enough. But when we talk about the factories which you were talking about, and the agricultural setup, or the blue collar crimes, there they are not aware of their rights, because there the direct liabilities can be set up. So if there is no systematic corporation, and there are 4 people who are having the authority over the workers, then they can be held liable as per the direct liability, that this person is torturing, or this person is providing a bad work environment for me, this person is not giving me the wages. Then you can say, and you can set that this person or a specific person is doing so and so act, right? But when in a corporate, the liability or the uh, you can't say that this is the person who is giving all the orders, because there is many levels of hierarchy and there are many tiers to it. So it is even more difficult in big corporations than we talk about if we talk about small corporations, or if there are only 2 people who are in authority.
I'm sure you would have seen similar cases coming up because of the nature of your father's work. So, growing up, and also, I guess you had your internship in the Labour Commission.
Yeah. Yes. So I really want to add to this because you brought it up. So there was actually one case happened, and I was interning in my father's office. So there was a case in which there was some money laundering by the bank. So the manager was coming for the case regarding the workers, and my dad in that particular case, he was really angry. Not, I'll not say angry, but he was like that this person should get the punishment. But then again, at that particular time, my uncle was there in the house and he was the manager in the bank. So he told my father that this person is not having any authority, even though you can say that this person is the manager. Even then, he said that this person is not having any authority and it is the orders of the higher management. And therefore, if you will say that, or if you will pass the order that this person should be held liable, then it would be wrong, because the higher management is getting free of all the liabilities. And that is what I was also talking about earlier, that if there is a big corporation, and that was a big bank, so that was a big bank, and therefore the manager was getting all the liabilities because he was the first person to have the authority. So the workers who are not having anybody who are under them, leaving those, he was the first person who was having authority over that branch. But the orders were not from him, the orders were from the higher management, from the parent office, and they were held,
So he
they
was
were
just the
they were
executioner.
freed, they were freed from the case if that order would have been given by my father. But then because he was in the house and there was the discussion which happened, then he also realized that this is what is happening and this might be the case as well. So then there was more investigation done in that particular case, and that is why that order in that particular manner wasn't passed. So yes, this happens. The higher management gets away with the liability, and the lower management, who are just the face to the employees who are not having any power, those are the people who generally take the beatings of all the intent or the works of the higher management.
Okay, so moving forward, this was very well put up. Uh, in an increasingly globalized business world and the multinational companies that we all discussed about, there comes a question of jurisdiction, because you have come up with the term twice or thrice in your discussion. So, how does this whole issue of jurisdiction applies in the legal system? When the parent company is established somewhere else, they have a subsidiary company who are established in a different country. So, can you discuss how international operations and varying jurisdiction influence the corporate criminal responsibility?
When we talk about the jurisdiction, it is basically the laws of that land. So it varies from country to country. So what you're talking about is if a company should be held liable, if the parent company should be held liable if they are having subsidiary companies. So there are many countries who believe that the subsidiary corporations are independent corporations, and you will have to establish the relationship between the parent company as well to the subsidiary company, that the higher management or the top management, the CEO, is having the right or authority or is even giving orders to the subsidiary uh, corporation. Then the parent company can be held liable. Otherwise, if we talk about India, the the subsidiary corporation is considered to be individual or independent. So in those cases, you will have to set the relationship, and then the parent company can be held liable. And also, what I was talking about, that if we talk about the jurisdiction and if there are different laws in different countries, then they will not help each other in actually putting the liability on a very big organization or a corporation, because they are having multinational businesses. So this is what needs to be there, that there should be some unified codification, or there should be some uniform laws regarding the criminal corporate liability for the corporations, so that even if the company is supposedly from India and the work is done in US, UK, and Canada, then they should be able to be held liable in all those countries, because they are having multinational businesses. So the countries can help each other only when there is any specific law. So there can be some guidelines which is given to every country, which can be accepted by, uh, which can be proposed to the countries, and then they can accept or reject whatever they feel like they can add to it, they can amend to it. So there can be some discussions on that basis, but there needs to be some guidelines which are uniform to every country, so that they also come together in putting the criminal liability on the big corporations who go away, or who get free just by paying some amount of fine or by the penalty, and even the higher management, they are not getting the punishment which they should be getting, because they are involved in all those activities, and they are putting the liabilities on the junior management.
So you agree that there is a lack of provisions and the lack of law globally. It's not just a
I
country-wise issue. Or is there a country that you would specifically say that they have a concrete law around it, or they deal with their corporate criminal responsibilities? They take these things very seriously.
see what I don't believe personally that there is any country who is having very good laws regarding the criminal responsibility or the liabilities of country, because then again, since I was talking about that, there are crimes which are defined, but what will happen, that is not defined. And that is the case in many countries, that they are having specific laws. Even Germany is having, we know that the UK is having, Scotland is having, US is having, but then again they are not having specific what should be the repercussion to it, and that is the lacuna which we are facing. So I feel that there is a lot to do in this particular area to set the companies as per what we can say in proportion to the life imprisonment, if the case, if the crime is of the such
Like
severity.
carbide factory case.
Right,
Because
absolutely.
thousands of people died, and
Absolutely.
1 lakh rupees is nothing
Right,
as compared to that.
right.
Okay. So with this, I'll come to my last question. Is that with the changing landscape of the corporates, and every day the verticals are changing, and like we discussed, the processes are coming up slow. So given the and rapid pace of the technological developments, how do you foresee the future trends in corporate criminal liabilities evolving?
So I feel in the evolution of the liability of corporates, we can include the things like the cyber crimes, because digitalization is increasing per second, and the laws are not at par with the digitalization. So there need to be uh, principles, or there need to be laws based on the cyber crime. Also now there are AIs and automation. Also, what can be added in this particular liability is something called the goodwill. So if there is a company, and that company has committed that crime, and all the companies or the corporates, they are based on goodwill, their businesses are based on goodwill. So if any statement is made publicly which that the company is not adhering to the guidelines of the state or of that country, then it will damage their goodwill. So the publicity of what the actions of those corporations are, if those corporations are involved in such crimes, then that can be done. And also there is a term coined in Japan, which is karoshi, which is death by overwork. So that is a concept which is there, which is what we can say is that came up, or that is being aware, that is being made aware by the people, but then again it is not included in the criminal liability of the corporations. However, in Japan, the companies are now taking steps to rectify this mistake, and they are actually making the work to be 4 days a week instead of 5 days or 6 days or 7 days. Because in Japan, what was happening, the people were committing suicide because of overwork. They were having so much responsibilities, so that term was coined. Therefore, we can say that there are certain things which are not yet included in the criminal liabilities, because overwork, nobody would have thought that it could be a criminal offense.
And how do you define a overwork?
And how do you define overwork? Absolutely. So this is something which is then again very discretionary, and also there can be some minimum and maximum hours set for the week, supposedly, that if a person is working 7 days a week, every day 10 hours, then it will be considered to be overwork. So there needs to be some guideline set up to say that this is overwork, and if any company is allowing that overwork, then that person or that company will be considered to be criminally liable, because they will abet the people to actually commit suicide one day. And that is what happens in blue collar crimes, blue collar jobs, because there is no accountability. And the workmen or the laborers, since they are not having any authority over you, or they are not having any voice, because they are not, we can say that they are not powerful as per when we talk about authority, then there these people are exploited a lot. And there we can say that overwork something over on these lines, that this can be also included in the criminal liability, because now we know that work from home is taking over everything. So previously it was 5 days of work, but now you're expected to work all day, and you can get mails at night, you can get mails in the morning. So what is the temperament, or what is the mental condition of the employees who are working in that organization? So there can be some seminars, or there can be some appointments of actually taking out and we can say analyzing if the mental health of these people in this organization is at par or not. So there can be some criteria on that basis as well. And there can be surveys. We know that in companies there are different cells which are there, that if you're facing any stress in the work environment, you can go there, you can get very speedy uh, redressal or the result. When we go in courts, it is a time taking process, but there are cells in the organizations, that if you're facing sexual harassment, if you're facing such work environment which is hostile for you, then you can approach these cells. So which is then again can be something which can be opted by the organizations to reduce their liability, or can say that we are taking steps, or we are working in that direction, that we don't face any liability or the criminal liability, because these things can uh, the corporations should be, this is what I personally believe, that the corporations should be held to be criminally liable if they are providing such hostile environment to the workers, and also if they are expected to work 7 days 10 hours a week, and because of that they are suffering and their mental health is suffering.
Yeah. That was wonderful, Gargi.
Yes, thank you.